A young writer sentenced to death on a freezing December morning stands blindfolded in Semyonovsky Square. He is reprieved at the last second. Years later, he endures 4 years of brutal hard labor in Siberia, his soul reshaped by shackles, barracks, and the silent suffering of the condemned. This descent becomes the crucible of everything that makes Dostoevsky's exploration of the human soul so relentless and urgent. But how did a man broken by exile become literature's boldest psychologist of guilt, freedom, and shattered faith? The answer lies deeper than you might think. Iron rings clamped around the ankles, each weighing nearly 7 pounds, never left the flesh. The chain between them allowed only the shortest steps. Every movement scraped bone and skin raw. In the barracks, the air was thick with sweat, tobacco, and the stench of unwashed bodies. 50, sometimes 100 men crowded each log-walled room, stacked in tiers on rough wooden bunks, 10, 12, even 20 to a board, pressed so close that sleep was a wrestling match for space and breath. Lice crawled in the straw. The windows, rimmed with frost, let in only the faintest gray light. Before dawn, a trumpet's call pulled the convicts from uneasy sleep. The day's work would stretch 12, sometimes 14 hours in the months when the sun rose early. In winter, the cold bit straight through the walls and labor lasted 8 or 9 hours, but the chill made every minute feel longer. The men hauled stone for fortress walls, dug foundations through frozen earth, chopped timber, and carried bricks in endless relays. In summer, hands bled from quarrying rock, 2 or 3 cubic meters each day, the weight never lessened by the iron at their feet. In winter, the work shifted inside to mending boots or sewing uniforms, but the cold seeped into marrow. Labor taught endurance and small cruelties. Rations arrived in wooden troughs, black rye bread, sometimes moldy, a ladle of watery cabbage soup, a scrap of salt beef if the season permitted. 2 pounds of bread a day was the main sustenance, and even that could be halved as a punishment. Hunger gnawed at the men, their faces hollowed by months of meager food and relentless toil. Scurvy and dysentery stalked the barracks, and the weak often vanished without ceremony. Discipline was enforced by both the guards and the convicts themselves. Each barrack had its own starosta, a convict foreman who kept order and handed out tasks. The criminal elite, the thieves and vori, ruled by threat and theft, extorting rations, beating anyone who crossed them. Political prisoners, men like Dostoevsky, were outcasts targeted for their education and ideas. The lowest in the hierarchy, they endured not only the state's punishment, but the contempt of their fellow inmates. Floggings were common. 50, even 100 lashes for defiance or slow work. Some men were locked in dark cells, bread and water their only companions. Chains grew heavier for repeat offenses. Yet in the dim hours after labor, when the guards' attention slackened, stories sometimes traveled in whispers from bunk to bunk, tales of lost families, distant villages, or the crimes that brought them here. In that darkness, small sparks of shared humanity flickered between men who, by day, were nothing but numbers in chains. The barracks of Omsk did not break every man, but they ground down the body and tested the soul. For Dostoevsky, each night spent among the condemned, each day beneath the weight of iron, became a lesson in how suffering shapes the mind, and how, even in the bleakest corners, the need for dignity and connection endures. Inside the walls of Omsk, the rules of Tsarist discipline demanded more than silence, they demanded isolation. Political prisoners like Dostoevsky were denied letters, denied books, denied even the comfort of their own words on paper. Official regulations forbade correspondence. The few who risked a whisper or a scrap of writing faced punishment, extra chains, bread rations cut in half, days in a dark cell. For 4 years, Dostoevsky's world narrowed to the sound of chains and the low voices of men, forced together by fate and the state's suspicion. Yet in the cracks of this system, something unexpected grew. Each evening, when the guards' vigilance faded and the work calluses throbbed, men gathered in the shadows of the barracks. There, words moved from mouth to ear, never written, always spoken. The condemned shared their stories, a childhood in a distant village, a mother's last letter burned by police, a crime confessed or denied. Thieves, peasants, rebels, and murderers, each voice carried its own pain, each tale a fragment of lost dignity. Dostoevsky listened. He listened not as an outsider, but as a man condemned, his own body marked by the iron at his ankles and the hunger in his belly. In these whispered circles, a new understanding took root. The men who by day were rivals or predators became, if only for a moment, companions in suffering. A thief's memory of a brother left behind, a murderer's regret, a peasant's longing for spring fields. These stories revealed the soul beneath the crime, the person behind the number. Deprived of pen and paper, Dostoevsky became a vessel for these confessions. He absorbed the rhythm of their speech, the flicker of hope or shame in their words. Years later, in the House of the Dead, he would recall how the prison's cruelty forced men to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow sufferers, bound by a need for recognition and mercy. No coded notes survive from Omsk, no secret messages smuggled past the guards. The only record is the memory of voices carried in the mind of a future writer. In the enforced silence, Dostoevsky learned that suffering could open a path to compassion. The condemned, denied forgiveness by the world, offered it to each other in the form of a story shared across the darkness. This experience did not erase the brutality of the barracks, but it planted the seed of an idea that even in the most degraded circumstances, the human soul seeks dignity, and that empathy is born from shared pain. What Dostoevsky carried out of Omsk was more than scars or memories of deprivation. It was the conviction that every soul, no matter how lost, contains the possibility of redemption if someone is willing to listen. He left with the sense that to listen is itself a moral act, and that the questions he carried were not private questions. They were a mirror for the human condition, unresolved and deeply relevant today. The first sign was a flicker behind the eyes, a sudden warmth, a sense of fullness, as if the air itself thickened and pressed inward. For Dostoevsky, these moments came without warning. He would pause mid-sentence, his gaze fixed on nothing, and a hush would settle around him. Anna, his wife and witness to these episodes, described how his face seemed to glow as if illuminated from within by a light no one else could see. The world would narrow to a single, overwhelming sensation of bliss, a feeling so intense it seemed to erase suffering, time, and even the boundaries of self. In those seconds before the seizure took hold, Dostoevsky stood on the edge of something immense and unspeakable. Doctors in the 1860s called it the falling sickness. Today, neurologists recognize it as temporal lobe epilepsy, a condition that shaped not only Dostoevsky's body but his understanding of the mind's limits. Each month brought another episode, sometimes more, each one beginning with that ecstatic aura. Modern brain imaging, unknown in Dostoevsky's time, reveals a surge of activity in the insula, a region deep within the brain tied to emotion, consciousness, and the sense of self. Electrical stimulation of this area in recent studies produces sensations eerily close to those Dostoevsky described: overwhelming joy, unity with the universe, a brief escape from the body's suffering. But the price was steep. After the light came darkness, convulsions, memory loss, hours of exhaustion. Anna recorded nights spent at his bedside, watching him struggle for words, his mind clouded and muscles trembling. The attacks left him drained, sometimes unable to recall what had happened. For Dostoevsky, the body was not a vessel for reason, but a force that could interrupt, overwhelm, and even annihilate the will. Every seizure was a reminder that consciousness itself was fragile, subject to forces beyond logic or intention. He would later give this experience to Prince Mishkin in The Idiot, a character whose innocence and insight are inseparable from the moments when his body betrays him. In Mishkin's aura, as in Dostoevsky's own, the border between suffering and transcendence disappears. The body, in its sudden rebellion, reveals a secret, that the soul's deepest truths may arrive not through reason but through the shattering of reason's control. For Dostoevsky, epilepsy was not just an illness. It was a challenge to the very idea that the mind could master the self. Anna, always the observer, saw in these episodes both terror and revelation, a glimpse into the mystery that would haunt his fiction and his life. Wiesbaden's casino doors closed late, but Dostoevsky rarely left before dawn. The tables drew him in with the promise of a single, decisive win, enough to erase debts and enough to buy time. Instead, the losses multiplied. In the span of a week, he lost more than $3,000, each coin recorded in the casino ledgers, each telegram to his publisher, Stolovsky, more desperate than the last. The money vanished as quickly as it came, borrowed against future work, pawned from the last valuables in his pockets. Anna, his young stenographer, watched him return night after night, face drawn, hands trembling from exhaustion and hope. She saw the fever in his eyes, the way he calculated odds only to risk everything again, drawn by the rush of near redemption. He was driven by compulsion. The publisher's deadline hung over them like a sentence. If Dostoevsky failed to deliver his new novel by the end of the month, he would lose the rights to all his future works. With only 26 days left, he turned to Anna with a proposal. She would take down every word as he dictated, hour after hour, sometimes through the night. The pace was relentless. Each morning began at the desk, Dostoevsky pacing, voice urgent, ideas tumbling out faster than his hands could move. Anna transcribed every line, her shorthand the only thing keeping up with his racing thoughts. The days blurred together, marked only by the ticking clock and the mounting tension. Outside, the city's autumn chill pressed against the windows. Inside, Dostoevsky's mind spun with characters locked in their own compulsions, gamblers, dreamers, men on the edge of ruin. The manuscript grew by the hour, fueled by anxiety and the need to escape financial collapse. Anna managed the household accounts, stretching the last rubles, negotiating with creditors, and shielding her husband from the worst of the demands. Her practicality anchored his chaos, but even she could not slow the frantic tempo. On the 26th day, the final page was dictated. The Gambler was finished, born not from inspiration but from the pressure of debt and the threat of failure. Dostoevsky's compulsion at the roulette table had found its way onto the page. Every risk and loss transformed into narrative speed. The urgency that drove him to wager everything now pulsed through his fiction, pushing his characters and himself toward the brink. In the end, it was not luck that saved him, but discipline, forced by desperation and the steady hand of a partner who could match his pace. A man sits alone in a dim Petersburg room, speaking to no one and everyone. In 1864, the underground man begins, "I am a sick man. I am a spiteful man." His words bite through the silence, not as confession, but as defiance. He rejects reason, mocks the very idea of improvement, and turns suffering into a badge of honor. In the half-light, his wounded consciousness spirals, resentment feeding on itself, logic twisted into knots. To be too aware is a sickness, he insists, and the mind becomes its own prison, festering in humiliation and spite. Here, the soul is not healed by knowledge, it is tormented by it. 2 years later, another voice takes the stage. Raskolnikov, in the fevered streets of 1866 Petersburg, carries a secret heavier than any chain. He believes himself above ordinary morality, free to transgress for a higher purpose. But guilt worms its way beneath his skin, relentless and corrosive. The air in his garret thickens with dread as he rehearses the crime, then staggers through days of delirium. The moment of confession arrives not as triumph but as collapse. He forces the words out in a whisper to Sonia. "It was I who killed the old woman and her sister with an axe." The act of speaking becomes a kind of exorcism, the soul stripped bare in the presence of another human being. Raskolnikov's torment is not only punishment for his deed, but for the pride that led him to believe he could escape consequence. In 1869, Dostoevsky gives us Prince Mishkin, a man whose innocence and suffering radiate from him like a luminous aura. Mishkin's compassion is so absolute it borders on madness. He moves through drawing rooms and tenements, his presence unsettling, his kindness mistaken for weakness. Before his seizures, he is filled with a sense of light so intense it seems to dissolve the boundaries of self. This fleeting bliss is inseparable from the pain that follows, a revelation that the soul's deepest truths are found not in reason, but in the trembling space between agony and ecstasy. These voices do not harmonize. Each is isolated, locked in a private struggle with guilt, pride, or the ache of too much consciousness. Dostoevsky's novels become laboratories for interior torment, where characters are pushed to the edge, their suffering laid bare. Through them, the question lingers: can the soul survive such knowledge? Or is suffering itself the only route to meaning? A group of men gathers in a provincial Russian town, their eyes restless, their talk ablaze with theory and grievance. In 1872, Dostoevsky publishes Demons, a novel that exposes the consequences of ideas unmoored from conscience. The conspirators Shatov, Stavrogin, and Verkovensky speak in slogans, each voice bent on remaking the world, each certain that violence will purify what is rotten. The air grows thick with suspicion and calculation. A single murder becomes a test of loyalty, and then a chain of blood. Dostoevsky's narrative refuses to grant any one voice the final word. Instead, the novel becomes a fevered dialogue where certainty breeds only more uncertainty, and the boundary between idealism and fanaticism dissolves in the dark. 8 years later, in The Brothers Karamazov, the questions deepen. Ivan, the intellectual, demands justice from God, insisting that no paradise can justify the suffering of a child. Alyosha, his brother, clings to faith, seeking meaning and compassion. Between them stands the Grand Inquisitor, a tale within the novel, spoken by Ivan. In that tale, Christ returns to earth only to be condemned by the Church for granting humanity too much freedom. The Inquisitor declares that nothing has ever been more insupportable for a man and a human society than freedom. For Dostoevsky, the gift of liberty is also a burden, a source of terror as much as hope. The Grand Inquisitor's vision is chilling. People long for miracles, bread, and authority, not the agony of choice. Yet the silent Christ offers no answer, only a kiss, and the story's meaning remains suspended between accusation and forgiveness. Dostoevsky's late novels are not monologues, but polyphonic confrontations. Each character speaks with full conviction, yet no voice is allowed to dominate or resolve the conflict. The critic Mikhail Bakhtin would call this polyphony, a chorus of irreconcilable perspectives, each demanding to be heard. In these pages, the soul's struggle is not against external enemies, but against the seduction of certainty. the temptation to surrender freedom in exchange for comfort. The result is a literature of open wounds, where the search for truth is endless and every answer breeds new questions. Today, neuroscientists still debate whether our choices are shaped by fate, freedom, or hidden compulsions, echoes of questions Dostoevsky raised 150 years ago. In an age of algorithmic predictions and moral uncertainty, his brutal honesty remains a mirror we cannot turn away from. The soul's darkness endures, waiting for each of us to decide if meaning is found or made. Share your thoughts below.